Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here with you today to give you an overview on the ongoing negotiations in the Joint Initiative on Services Domestic Regulation, which I have the honor of coordinating. The initiative is looked as one of the WTO negotiating issues most promising for delivery by the next ministerial conference, which, as you will know, will take place at the end of November this year. In the coming 8 minutes, I would like to address these three main points. First, I would like to explain how the issue of services domestic regulation is addressed by the joint initiative, and in particular, how an initiative outcome on this topic will look like. Secondly, I would like to inform you about the current status of the negotiations. And finally, I will provide an outlook of the next steps that the initiative will take to arrive at the finalization of the negotiating process in time for the MC12. But let me pause for a second on what we concretely mean when we talk about services domestic regulation. For services business, and this is something that you know very well, who want to export abroad, it is sometimes challenging to find out about the requirements for obtaining a license, and often there is no one to turn to for requests for information, or when suppliers file their applications, there are at times left in the dark as to how long processing times will be, and by when they can expect approval of their application, and in some places, documentation requirements are excessive and burdensome, and still relying on paper rather than electronic means, original documents rather than certified copies. In a nutshell, what business had long been demanding are transparent, fit-for-purpose requirements and procedures which minimize the unintended consequences of regulations in services sectors. Um, Now that we have clarified what are the problems that can be linked to domestic regulatory measures, let me move to the questions of how this issue is addressed specifically by the Joint Initiative on Services Domestic Regulation. The disciplines on services domestic regulation developed by the initiative respond broadly to business needs expressed under the three pillars: transparency, legal certainty and predictability, and regulatory quality and qualifications. On transparency related matters, WTO members will be required to make available all information needed by business to comply with requirements and procedures for authorization, including on, for example, authorization fees, contact points, licensing criteria, and technical standards. And in addition, members will have to respond to inquiries by services suppliers through appropriate mechanisms. And finally, the disciplines aim to improve the involvement of suppliers in the regulatory decision-making process with a call for publication of draft laws and regulations and the establishment of opportunities for interested suppliers to comment on such proposed measures. Under the pillar of legal predictability and certainty, the objective of the discipline is to ensure minimum guarantees to be followed by relevant authorities during the licensing and authorization process. As you can see from the screen, this includes several elements such as indicative timeframes for processing applications or information on status and decisions on applications and the possibility to resubmit applications in case of rejection. And finally, the disciplines also aim to improve the regulatory quality of services markets and facilitate trading services, including by encouraging members to accept electronic applications and authenticated copies of documents, requiring the independence and impartiality of regulatory authorities when dealing with authorization applications, and the transparency and reasonability of authorization fees. The regulatory disciplines that the initiative has negotiated over the past 3 years are contained in the reference paper on services domestic regulation. What is important to know is that the reference paper provides for certain built-in flexibilities that aim to preserve space for differences in WTO's members' regulatory capacity and approaches to services regulation. I will come back to the reference paper and its content in a moment, but what I would like to highlight here is that the reference paper is only just one of the two main components of an initiative's outcome. To give concrete legal effect to the reference paper, participating members will inscribe it in the respective services schedules so that the disciplines on services domestic regulation will apply horizontally to all the sectors committed therein. Um, okay. Uh, this is indeed what our ministers had instructed us to do through the joint statement issued in Paris in May 2019. While taking stock of the great progress the initiative made in the previous years since its establishment, the participating members committed to continue work on services domestic regulation with a view to incorporating an outcome in the respective schedules of specific commitments by the MC12. Now that I described what form an outcome on services domestic regulation will take and what is the initiative's working objective, I would like to inform you about where the negotiations on the first component of the outcome, the reference paper, stand and what is in it. At the last initiatives meeting on 27 September, and thanks to the flexibility and pragmatism demonstrated by all participants, the initiative was able to resolve the remaining outstanding issues in the reference paper. So I'm very pleased to inform you that the negotiations on the text have now come to a conclusion. The reference paper on services domestic regulation is now available as an unrestricted document accessible to all on the WTO website. What you will see when you will skim through the reference paper is that it's composed of three main sections. On very important aspects I would like to focus on for a moment pertains to the flexibilities provided for developing country members participating in this initiative. First, developing economies can delay the application of specific provisions in sectors in which they face implementation difficulties. The use of transitional periods can aid them to make any necessary adjustments to their domestic regulatory frameworks. In addition, least developed countries deciding to join the initiative will integrate the disciplines into their GATT schedules only when they graduate from LDC status. And finally, developed and developing country members in a position to do so are encouraged to provide specific technical assistance and capacity building to developing and, in particular, LDC members upon their request and on mutually agreed terms and conditions. Sorry, I have a call. And now, as a last point in my presentation, I would like to inform you on the concrete next steps that the initiative will take to arrive at finalizing this negotiating process in time for the ministerial conference at the end of November. Based on the conclusion of the negotiations of the text reference paper, as coordinator of this initiative, I have suggested that the group works towards the preparation and submission of services schedules incorporating the disciplines on services domestic regulation by the end of October. Sorry. As I have just said, a package of schedule by participating members is a fundamental component of an outcome on services domestic regulation because only through schedules the disciplines will be given legal effect. The ministerial conference itself will be an opportunity for the participating members to declare the conclusions of the negotiations, as well as to provide guidance for the start of certification process in 2022. At present, there are 65 members participating in this initiative, and they represent about 90% of world services trade. Most recently, Singapore announced its decision to join the group, but as we rapidly approach the ministerial and the contours of an outcome on services domestic regulation become clearer and clearer, many other members have already indicated an interest in this process. Let me conclude on a few key messages. As you can see, the negotiations are substantively at a very advanced stage. Domestic regulation is, as I'm sure most of you will have heard already, one of the most promising prospects for delivery by the MC12. The participants are convinced that an outcome on services domestic regulation is an outcome for business because services suppliers will be those who will benefit from the enhanced transparency, legal certainty, and predictability, and ultimately the greater regulatory quality and facilitation that the disciplines seek to establish. When they trade within markets of members who adopt the disciplines, services suppliers will all equally enjoy the benefits deriving from the implementation of these disciplines. What does it mean in practice? It means better access to services markets and new export opportunities. It is clear A result on services domestic regulation will have a concrete impact on the operations of service suppliers and the performance of services sectors, and for that reason constitute an important building block in the post-COVID economic recovery. I believe, and all the members' initiative do as well, an outcome on services domestic regulation will not only finally provide a long-time due response to business needs, but will also renew energy in the multilateral trading system and the WTO as a negotiating forum. Thank you very much for your attention.